Hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar at Notes Code. We appreciate your time and we appreciate the presenters' time for being with us here today. I know it takes a lot of preparation work to prepare these webinars and to present them, so a very special thank you out to Mark Systems for doing this. Our topic today is 9 things that might be affecting the performance of your Notes applications, and our presenter is Mohammed Omar. And I know he has lots of information to share with us, so without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Mohammed, and I'm going to switch the screen to you now.
Yes.
Perfect, and I will let you know as soon as we see your screen. And just as a reminder to our audience, if you do have some questions as we go along in the presentation, you can type them into the GoToWebinar control panel. There's a section to add questions. And also during Mohammed's presentation today, we will have some polls, some user polls. So please participate in those, and we'll show we'll display the results after each poll. Okay, we see your screen. The time is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Hi, everyone. This is Mohammed Omar from Marga Systems, India. And I'm going to be presenting on the 9 things that might be affecting the performance of your Lotus Notes applications. Before I get into the topic, let me just quickly introduce Marga. Marga Systems has been a leader in the domain of collaboration and communication. We provide software services and consultancy over Lotus Notes applications and many of the IBM Lotus suite of products. We are an IBM partner, and we have been in the market for quite a while now. We do applications, websites, web applications, mobile applications, web enablement of Lotus Notes applications, support and maintenance of existing portfolios, modernization, migration, and you name them all. We are doing that as an organization. Going ahead, I am Omar. You can call me Omar. I am a project manager at Marga Systems. I started my career with Lotus Notes. The time I started, around 6.5 was the version that was more prominent in the market. And I have also worked on previous versions, 4.6, 5, and the latest version that I have worked on is 9, which is pretty much the latest that is there on IBM Lotus. I also released a white paper very recently that gives IT managers, CIOs, a step-by-step guide to migrate their Lotus Notes applications into XPages. I am a Lotus Notes and an XPages enthusiast. I have put my hands onto XPages ever since it came into the market. So I'm pretty much on equally enthusiastic about Notes, web, and XPages applications. Have dealt on predominantly HR domain as well as on manufacturing and production domains. So here's the table of contents for today's presentation or webinar. What we would see up front is a small introduction on what is application performance and why is it that important? What happens to functionality and how are these two interrelated? Secondly, we will go through specifically on Lotus Notes applications and performance expectations. Then we'll go to the core of the topic itself. What are those 9 things that we are speaking about? And then the conclusion. So before we start up, we have a poll for you. Scott, can you open poll number 1?
Okay, we will launch poll number 1. First poll.
Yes.
We get first poll is, what version of Lotus Notes are you using in your organization? This is a multi-select because we realize there might be companies that have multiple clients, multiple versions still running. So do select all that apply. All right, great. We're almost at 80% of our participants participating in the poll. Give us 5 more seconds. have almost everyone else available. Okay, here we go. We're going to close the poll and I will display the results. So it looks like 85X is still king of the hill with a good number of 9 users in there. That's great.
Yeah, that's encouraging, and that's really heartening to see people taking that step. A lot of people wait for a certain amount of time until people comment about the stability of a version. People have at least used it in major organizations, but the way the roadmap has been laid from 8.5 to 9, it's really really good, and really not that difficult a decision to migrate for the benefits that they give on Notes 9. Okay, thanks everyone for participating on the poll. Moving ahead. So what exactly is application performance? Application performance is a relative non-definitive metric, as I call it, because what can be non-acceptable, unacceptable in one organization can be an established standard or a norm in another organization. If 3 seconds is too slow for me, it might be very fast for another organization or another user accessing the application from a different part of the world. So it's a very relative term. It depends on which benchmark we are comparing against, what are the external and the internal factors that affect it, how are we situated in the whole ecosystem of the software application environment. So it's a very relative, non-definitive metric. Even till date, there has been no specific benchmark that can be quantified. People talk a lot about user experience, people talk a lot about speed, people talk a lot about performance, but people are still in ranges. People say anything that opens within X to Y seconds is normally deemed as slow. So people are still on ranges. We don't have specific numbers that say, for example, anything that opens in 5 seconds is faster. And we also experience this in our daily life. For example, we know that there are so many banking gateways that we access in our day-to-day life. We purchase something online. None of us actually complain about the speed of a banking authentication because we know the crucial things that it goes through. We know that there's a redirection, or there are more than one vendors or more than one parties involved. So that seems acceptable, whereas if I type my username and password and click the login button, the same delay is termed as slow. So it is a non-definitive metric. It's a relative metric that changes from time to time and place to place and situation to situation. For VIP users, for people who don't have time, for people who are sitting right at the top of the tree in the organization, for CIOs, for CTOs, for department managers, for business managers, poor performance, according to them, is a non-working application. If you give them an application that takes 25 seconds to load, it's as well, it's equal to them to saying that this application does not work. Whereas functionally this application might be perfectly okay. It could have done wonders in terms of calculating statistics. It could have given the predicted turnover of the company over the next year. But if it takes 15 seconds to load that particular number to that precision, according to the top guy, it might be, he might send you a mail saying this application does not work. So as you go up the tree, people compare performance to the functionality of the application itself. So when they say it works or it doesn't work, they actually mean it is fast enough for me so that I can invest my time, or they say it's too slow for me to invest my time there. The third point that we need to understand in terms of application performance is that time is money. Time is productivity. For organizations who bill their employees' time spent to their customers, if we make the employees wait, if we ask people to wait for 5 seconds before they could proceed with the next step, these 5 seconds are actually billable to their end customers. These 5 seconds are actually seconds in which productivity is lost, meaning this is virtually an idle time for the employees. So if you just multiply this, for example, 30 to 45 seconds of performance considerations or waiting time on applications across a band of 100 users or 500 users across an organization, it amounts up to a very considerable amount of time which is lost just waiting and doing nothing. So time being money, people do not want to spend time just waiting without doing anything, especially in places where resources are built, when their pricing is based on hours, when their pricing is based on minutes spent. We also have consultants who work on a minutely basis, who charge so many dollars if they spend 30 minutes of their time. So if 1 minute of such a 30-minute time is spent on waiting for multiple applications to show data or for performance snacks, then that is really a considerable amount of idle timeout. The last part that we need to understand about application performance is the end users are human beings. They have the natural tendency to compare. They would have seen a lot of applications. Gone are the days when people used to refer to software people or IT-oriented people to be attached to their computers. Today, these are people who are always online on Facebook, who tweet while they attend seminars and workshops, people who are always online on the phone, on their iPads, on their devices. So their day and night is being spent in isolation or in participation with their devices, with applications. So everything right from the alarm that we wake up with until the time that we sleep after performing and completing our daily checklist is related to an application. Going to bed is one of the famous tweets that people do, or famous Facebook posts that people do before going to bed. Actually, they say feeling sluggish, feeling sleepy, gotta sleep now. So people are so much attached to applications, and this has nothing to do with what their profession is. People might be in the HR domain, people might be working as sales executives, people might be in the pharmaceutical domain, but that does not stop them from being immersed in a lot of applications that they use on their devices. So people often tend to compare. People compare what they like the most with what you give them as notes applications. So they say, my application also deals with data. My application also is connected on the internet. I access this from my home via my home internet. So people tend to compare. So we need to understand and realize what people are comparing Lotus Notes applications with. That will make us a better service provider to our end customers, and that will actually put us in the boots of the end user. Proceeding to the next part of this presentation, Lotus Notes as a thick client, Lotus Notes as a piece of software that runs on the desktop has created expectations, has created really, really tough expectations. How many times have you heard that a web application works slower than a Notes client application? How many times have you heard that an X-Page application is nowhere when compared to our Notes applications? So Notes applications have set a benchmark in terms of performance, in terms of speed of access, in terms of their response times. So people often tend to compare whatever application that you give with the fastest that they have used in their history, in their work experience. So if you give them a database which has just 5 design elements with some 10-15 records, they're obviously going to compare that with one which has 100,000 records, because for the end users, they cannot differentiate between high volume data and low volume data. For them, it is ultimately a Lotus Notes application. It is ultimately a Lotus Notes database for them. So irrespective of how much data the NSF contains, how much of volume of data is there that is occupied by the NSF, they tend to compare this application with the fastest that they have experienced in their work history. So we need to understand that users are very sensitive towards the fastest application and the slowest application. Just give me a second. Let me disable some alerts. I'm sorry for that. Thank you very much. Okay, the next thing that we need to understand is that the users are used to web applications. They expect Gmail, they use Gmail, they use Yahoo Mail, they use Facebook, everything on the browser, and yet they can wait for 3 seconds or 4 seconds for their Gmail to load, and if 3 seconds is what they have to wait for the Lotus Notes mail to load, for the users it is slow. So we always need to understand and keep in mind that though people differ in platforms, people consider certain benchmarks as acceptable in certain platforms, they don't consider them acceptable in Lotus Notes, because Lotus Notes has set the expectations very early and very, very, very strictly in terms of faster performance. Moving on, before we go to the 9 things, the core topic of today, let me have the second poll presented. Scott, poll number 2, please.
Okay. How many applications? If I hit the right button, it'll launch. There we go. So this is a select one only. How many notes application do you have in your organization? So if you don't know, best guess. Wow, I have to say I'm going to be surprised at this already. All right, we're over 80%. 5 more seconds. Very good. Okay, I'm going to share the results. Very good. I'm surprised we had some with 500 plus, but I know they're out there. But very good.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks all of you for participating in this poll. Let's go on to the 9 things. Now, this is interesting. Normally users and developers and administrators, they seem to revolve around technical stuff. When we speak about performance, people think it's something to do with RAM, network, internet connection speed, bandwidth, design, architecture. But you know what? The first thing that is important and necessary for us as IT service providers and developers, designers, architects, administrators is to understand the user perception and to manage it and to make the users aware of it. So we'll go one by one through this. So this is the exhaustive list that we are speaking about. Going to the first one. So this is a very interesting anecdote. We all know that elevators have mirrors. There is a history behind it, there's a story behind it. None of us knew, or maybe currently are not knowing how is a mirror related to an elevator. It so happened that when elevators were invented new, the speed of the elevators was drastically slow. People had to travel up slowly because they were new, the technology was new, and to increase the speed of the elevators was a very costly venture. So people started complaining about the speed of the elevators. They said the elevators are too slow, very, very slow. So the engineering companies, the engineering production companies, the manufacturing companies, the companies who were involved in setting up elevators took it up as a technical challenge. They started doing tweaks here and there. They started redesigning the engine. They started looking at the motors. They started looking at the relays. They started looking at every aspect of electrical and mechanical engineering just to achieve this benefit of a speeder lift or a speeder elevator. One of them was unique. He did not approach the problem with the problem statement that the users defined. The problem statement was elevators are slow. What he did was he added two simple words. He said people think elevators are slow. So he changed the problem statement. He said people think elevators are slow. So what should I do to make the people think that elevators are not slow? So instead of approaching it from a purely technical aspect, from an aspect of electrical and mechanical engineering, he approached it from a different way. How do we keep the people away from noticing that the elevators are actually slow? So what he did was make the users busy, engage the users in something that could divert their attention from something, from the speed of the elevator to something that they think is more important. So elevators are there in offices, in hotels, in conference halls, in offices. So when people walk out of the elevator, they want to look nice. They want to look beautiful. They want to look prepared. They want to look formal. So when people get into the elevators, they start looking at how much they are prepared for their process or for their work activity outside of the elevator. So what he did was he introduced this concept of a mirror inside an elevator. So what do people do? People go inside, start combing their hair. People go inside, start correcting or adjusting their suits. People go inside, make their lipsticks. People go inside, do makeups and cleanups, and they stay engrossed until the lift door opens at the desired floor. So this is the approach that he suggested, and this worked like a charm. When he did this change, and when he asked the same people who complained about the speed of the lift to travel inside the same lift, they went on and they said, wow, this elevator is fast. So it's not about the actual speed of the lift or the elevator, it's about how the user perception and awareness is managed. How do you keep the users involved? How do you keep the users busy? And how do you make the users perceive what is more important to them? So when we say speed of the application, or the performance of the applications, that is where we got all these status indicators, the progress bars, the percentage completion, all this information at the status bar, the task bar, a progress bar at the top. Lotus Notes has a lot of facility where you can have your own Lotus script progress bar, which shows completed 15 out of 100 percentage, completed 30 percentage, completed 45 percentage. So any process that takes long, you see, is something that the user is interacted with. We have seen softwares that have, tips and hints as a pop-up when they first open it, so that when the things load at the back end, users are reading something which they think is very beneficial. So keeping the users engaged, telling them how much time it will take, reasoning out saying you are accessing volumes of data, so it might take 15 seconds for you to access this, is meaningful and will set expectations correctly. So as I said, users cannot differentiate between different types of applications. So we should keep the users engaged and aware of what type of application they are using, how much volume of data, is it bulk data or is it very few records. So if it is bulk data, we let the user know saying you are searching for 15 records amongst 100,000 records. We are retrieving it. It might take 5 seconds for us to complete this task. So that completes, or that sets the expectations for the users, and the users are mentally prepared. And when the users know that it is going to take 15 seconds and the process completes in 13 seconds, the user is happy. Whereas if the user does not know that it will take 10 seconds and it takes 10 seconds, then the user complains that the application is actually slow. So it's basically perception management and making the users aware of what is happening. Users do not want to hear anything technical. We cannot say that the view is being indexed. We cannot say that the FT index is not built. We cannot say the view column is categorized. These are things that the user does not want to hear. The user wants to hear things that are either meaningful to him, or the user just wants to say, what should I do to get the data? How much should I wait? Can I go resume my other tasks, or can I wait and the waiting is worth it so that I can get the data in 5 seconds? So that is the crux of it. The last part of it, that the users think that IT can manage the performance, IT can do it, but is not doing it. So that is where we need to justify the performance. We need to justify the performance and the delays that the particular application is going through. So we need to manage user perceptions, and we need to make the users aware of the delays and the reasons for the delay. Moving on. These are certain things that we will quickly walk through. We will see a lot about application design, application coding, and data within the application. Before that, there are certain things that we need to quickly walk through. So server configuration, there is something called a server availability index that is part of the server statistics. This is something that we need to look out for. If a server is having a 0% availability index or 5% availability index, that means 95% of the server is getting utilized at that point of time, which means the server is heavily loaded, which means the server cannot take further requests or cannot handle further requests at a faster pace. So either you increase the capacity of the server, or you decrease the load on the server by distributing the applications or increasing the number of CPUs or whatever. So server availability index is one thing that you need to look out for. There is a statistic called server show performance that shows how the server is performing. There is a NSF buffer pool size, which gives you how much of MB of data amongst the applications does the server need to cache in or keep as a buffer, so that every time that particular memory or that particular data is accessed, it can retrieve faster. There is something called a server availability threshold, which indicates that the server, if it crosses 60% utilization, the server shows up as busy. So if the server is one of the servers in a cluster, if the server is 1 out of 10 servers that form a cluster together, the server availability threshold is that number or that percentage of utilization that indicates that the server is busy. For example, if I give server application threshold as 60%, next time when there is a request to my server, when it is already 65% utilized or 60% utilized, the server rejects this request saying that this server is busy. That means this particular request is routed to another cluster on the same or another server in the same cluster. So if you have a cluster of servers, maintain a judicious an average level of server availability threshold. Let it not be 90%, let it not be 80%, let it be somewhere in between the 60 to 70%, so that the load is evenly balanced across all servers of the cluster. Lack of disk space is one of the other things why the servers do not function properly, especially if you are storing FT index in the same folder. If you are storing the index of the database within the same folder as the NSF files, this is bound to increase. As the data increases, the index size increases, thereby the amount of disk space remaining on the server machine comes down. The last thing is, when you monitor the performance of a server, and this can be done using the normal Windows performance monitor. So if you see that this disk is busy continuously, that this particular server is not accepting any request consistently because it is busy, then there is something you have to take off from this server. There is some task that is running on the server that is eating up or consuming a lot of resource on the server. So either you distribute that particular task across multiple servers, or you dedicate a particular server in the cluster for that particular reporting or that particular agent or that particular task, so that no users hit upon that for additional requests to be addressed. Moving on, we have other measures that we have to see on the 9 steps. Before that, here is my last and final poll. Scott, poll number 3, please.
All right, poll number 3. Question is, do you have applications running on X pages? And we're already over 80%. 5 more seconds. All right, I'm going to share the results. So almost half of us are still not running X pages.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, thanks Scott. Thanks everyone for attending this poll. So moving on, the reason why I threw on the X pages question before this is because there are certain configurations at a machine level, at a desktop level, that we need to address in order to get X pages applications performing better. So first one of them is if you have an 8 client, and we all know that between 7 and 8 Lotus Notes changed in the way it was built. Earlier it was built on top of C++, and starting version 8 it is built on Eclipse. So what used to be 500 or 400 files that used to load when the Notes client loads the first time is now a combination of 15,000 different files. So when you double click on the Notes icon from your from your desktop, if it is 8 or greater, there's actually more than 15,000 files that get involved in the process of bringing your Notes client up. And that's why if you have a Notes client of version 8 or greater, you need to have a 1 gig RAM. You need to have a minimum of 1 gigabyte. And if you are a heavy user, if you have Notes plus some other software that you regularly use, if you have Notes plus SharePoint, if you have Notes plus Oracle, if you have Notes plus SAP, if you have Notes plus any other heavy application that you use, the minimum requirement that IBM recommends is greater than 1 GB, that is 2 GB. And be sure that your users have the latest fix packs and patches installed. Every fix pack that IBM releases has a fix for known issues, and that can be quite a resolution or a solution for many of the woes that the user faces and complains about. Then there's this concept of local replicas. So if you want a user to just read data, he's not going to update it, and the servers are in a distant location, he has to connect via a VPN, or the network bandwidth is too low so that the application performance is getting disturbed, then local replica can be an option that you can enable. Then comes the things of old templates. Quite often when we upgrade our clients, say for example from 6.5 to 7 or from 7 to 8.5, there is a data folder that we normally back up because we think those files are crucial. In fact, every data folder with every release of Lotus Notes, they have a set of templates that are meant for that specific version. If you have a 6.5 data folder, there are 30 to 40 NTF Notes template files that have that are stored on that particular data folder, and these are very version specific. So if you do not delete those old NTFs, which of course you're not going to use anymore because you have migrated from 7 to 8.5, so these can be space killers. If you do not get rid of those old templates which you are not going to use, they still sit and tend to occupy your data folder, your space there, and thus affect your performance. Then comes this very important parameter called ODS on disk structure. As you see on the right, there is a table of standard ODS that every Notes version follows. So quite often when we migrate the client or we migrate the servers, people fail to upgrade this ODS version. And what happens is a database that was initially designed on version 6 for 6.5 or 7, for example, is moved as it is to 8.5, and it maintains the older ODS on this structure. For example, we still have some customers who have their databases, they just migrated from 7 to 8.5, and the ODS is still 43, which is the ODS of Node 6.5 and 7. This being the case, there is a considerable performance lag because the way that the database is built, the way that the database is rendered, the way that the database is compiled and built is all dependent on the version, and this ODS has a major say in the way that the performance is impacted. So I will go ahead and show you some setting that you need to do for this. The case study, the impact study of one such application showed that there is an 80% reduction in the memory occupied. So if something occupied 1 megabyte on Lotus Notes version 6.5 and 7, and if you change that ODS from 43 to 51 while migrating it to 8.5, it is just 200 KB. So it's 80% reduction of the database size and performance improvement thereupon based on this ODS size. That is a key parameter that we need to take care of. The next one is tuning the JVM. So the JVM should be set to 1/3 of the total available memory, and this is specifically for R8 plus, and this speeds up the loading of the Notes client itself. Then we have policies that we can set as administrators, as IT service providers. We can set some policies on the clients, desktop policies for our end users. One of them is, as I said, to upgrade the ODS. So you can see here on the desktop settings, one of the settings that can be set is enable upgrade of all local NSFs to latest ODS version. Doing this, every single NSF that you create on your local automatically upgrades itself to the latest one. So there is no need of a manual overhaul or a manual attention to this particular aspect of it. Moving on, there is one more policy setting that you can do to improve the Notes application performance. That is to compress the files when using ports, when using databases connected via TCP/IP. You can compress the data so that you can have it retrieved faster and with a better performance. Some notes.ini parameters that we need to have a look on the desktop is there is a parameter that is client underscore clock, and there's another parameter console underscore log underscore enabled. If you set these two parameters to 1, and if you want the output of this particular logging to be recorded in your local file and you give the path of the file, what happens is when you access data, when you access applications from your Lotus Notes client, there is this file that is getting constantly updated. The c:\debug.txt is a file that gets constantly updated by your application, and you can later on go and view how many milliseconds or seconds did it consume for you for a specific activity or for a specific application to open. What was the time taken? You can compare between application A and application B. You can compare between morning loading times and evening loading times of the same application. You can compare between with data and without data loading times. So you can have a lot of numbers to compare and arrive at statistics that could be helpful in performance tuning. The fourth of them is network dependencies. So I'm going to just go through quickly with this because we have more important stuff coming down. So we need to check out that the connection documents are correctly in place. Just doing a Control+O and typing in a server name will create a connection document in itself, but that will be a low priority document, and connecting to that server in the future might take longer than you normally creating a connection document properly. The second thing is the network bandwidth. If your bandwidth does not support movement of data largely, or if your bandwidth is choked, you need to go for a higher bandwidth. If the host files do not read the server names correctly, if the IP addresses are not configured correctly on the host files, this can be one more reason when accessing web applications. We need to look out at idle timeouts. What is the screen lock time of your desktop policy, as well as from a server level. We need to take care of VPNs that may be used for connectivity. We may need to look at the names and the formats that we use, the fully qualified format, or the common format, or the hierarchical format of servers, of IPs, and whatnot. So also the log files will contain information of specific data of why requests fail, or what is holding from page for the pages from loading, or what is keeping pages slow in response, and the similar information. So in this following slide, what I have is a sample screen where a server connection document was set just by opening the server from the file open dialog or the open database dialog, and automatically a server document was created. As you can see, the usage priority is default set to low if you create it programmatically, whereas if you create a connection document manually, you have the privilege of setting it to high. That means that next time you connect to the server, it's going to be faster. And this way of connecting to it by a programmatic connection document, just by pinging the server, is going to be slow every time you try it. Going to the fifth thing, and this is important, and this is where we'll go into specifics. If you have a design aspect of performance consideration, these are 6 things that we definitely need to look at. Weaves are the basic killers of performance. Any NSF file which has many weaves and which has multiple formatting of weaves, which has multiple categorized columns, sorting, and I will show you some example of how a weave design can impact the overall application performance. So here is my sample application. So what you see here, there are 3 weaves. There is an employee weave, there is a flat weave, and there's a categorized weave. So let me open the flat weave first to show you how it looks. So this is my flat weave, which has employee information just represented like a table, flat, no formatting whatsoever, nothing on the columns, no categorization, no sorting, no font formatting, nothing. Let's open the same data in another weave, which is called the categorized weave, and let's compare that with this. So here is my categorized weave. What I have is at least 5 layers of categorization. I have a lot of sorting here. I have 5 columns sorted, 5 columns categorized, and it's all the same data. It's all the same data. So let's go and see what is the difference between these 2 weaves from a design perspective. Here is my administrator. I right click on the database and I go to this particular option called manage weaves. Here is a manage weave dialog box that appears, and you can see here these are the 2 weaves that we are talking about. These are actually the weaves that contain the same data. There is no difference in the number of records that they contain. The only difference is the formatting. We have 5 categorized columns and 10 sortings in this weave called categorized weave, whereas we have nothing categorized, nothing sorted in this flat weave. So you can see it's more than 120% or 150% of the size of the flat weave. So this is a performance killer. The more you have categorized weaves, the more you have categorized columns, the more you have formatting to weaves, it's going to increase. And as you can see, 63% of the entire database is just a combination of these three weave indices. This is what we call weave indices or weave size. So the weave size have occupied 885 kilobytes of a total of 1 MB, which is 65 or 63% of the entire space. Let me repeat this so that we understand when this index gets built. So what I will do is I'll select a particular weave and I do a purge operation, and this purge operation is to clear this weave index size. So I am clearing both this. I have cleared the categorized weave and I have cleared the flat weave. Let me do a close here, go back again to my application and try to open the flat weave. I open the flat weave once by clicking on the flat weave, and then I open a categorized weave by clicking on the categorized weave. What's the impact at the back end, at the design level? I go back again to manage weaves, and there you see that with that one instance of me opening this weave, I have generated 559 KB of size and 230 KB of size of these weaves that have got built within that transaction. So on the first click, when I have accessed this weave, this size gets built up just based on the formatting of the weaves and not on the number of documents. So this is one important design constraint or design parameter that you might need to look at. So weaves, the number of weaves as minimal as possible is the better. Forms, again, within forms, the number of fields, the way the fields are arranged, the tabbed tables inside the forms, the use of computed subforms, the use of computed embedded weaves are all factors that might hinder database performance. Anything that computes during a form load is a performance killer. Readers field. Imagine I have 1,000 documents in a database and I am only entitled to access 10 of them because my readers field, my name in the readers field is only found in 10 of those documents. So what happens is when I open the weave on the Notes client, it actually scans through each of these 1,000 documents and then comes out with that result of 10 documents. So it's not as if I'm minimizing the document count from 1,000 to 10. I'm actually giving Notes this task of going and finding out every single reader's field and compare my name with that list. So that's a performance killer. The the alternate option to reader's field, if that is not sensitive data like salary or bank statement, if that is going to be a purchase statement or it's going to be a procurement statement which is not that confidential, then you can go and use embedded weaves with a show single category, which can do the same thing much faster. As I said, indexing of weaves when weaves get built up, encryption of data or field. If you have a field level encryption, that adds to database size and has an impact on the performance. And of course, replication, the replication settings, how much data does it replicate, how frequently does it replicate, all have an impact on the performance. From a coding perspective, we have 10 things lined up. DB lookups, the first of them, and DB columns. These are real-time performance killers. The more the number of DB lookups and DB columns, slower is the performance. Let me show you a sample scenario. Here is my employee form. Sorry, I have two forms. One I call a 1 DB lookup and I call another form as multiple DB lookups. So basically what do I have inside them? I have an employee ID that I have hardcoded as of now, and I have some data that gets looked up based on this employee ID. What I did on the form 2 is I created the same table which has the same information multiple times. That means I've just multiplied the number of DB lookups that this form actually does. So let's run this. I have put in some Lotus script snippets in the query open and the post open. So the query open will say when did this form start loading, and the post open will say when did this form stop loading. So when I run this 1 DB lookup, let's see what happens. The form got loaded, and you can see the start and the end loading time of the form is 1 second apart. So it started at 9:20:26 and ended at 9:20:27. Let's try the same thing with the multiple DB lookups form. Here it is. So if you see the result, started loading at 49 seconds and finished loading at 51 seconds. So just by increasing the number of DB lookups, we have a performance impact. The time for loading is double in this case, might be different in different scenarios based on how much data are you looking up, what type of data it is, what is the size of the data, what are the formatting, or what is the processing of the data that you do. So in a simple example, I showed how number of DB lookups that increase, the more the number of DB lookups, the more is the time to load, and hence lesser is the performance. So going back to our presentation, there is something called an agent profiling. If you go to the designer agent properties in version 8.5, you have something called an agent profiler. Let me show you where that is. If I have an agent here, here is an option called profile this agent. What this does is when you run this agent, it gives you a summary of how many times this for loop actually run, how many times, how many DB lookups does it execute, how many for loops, how many while loops, how many evaluate statements, and if it takes 10 seconds for this agent to complete, it will tell you where was this 10 seconds lost, what were the breakups of this 10 seconds, how much time was spent in loops, how much was spent in assigning parameters, how much of them were done in search. So it basically gives you a fragmented summary of how the time was spent by the agent when it ran. So this is going to be a crucial parameter you need to watch out for in order to optimize your code. Then usage of environment variables is another performance killer. So the lesser the environment variables, better is the performance. The easiest alternate to that could be profile documents and profile values. Next, declaration of variables. So instead of leaving variables undeclared, they consume a bigger amount of memory in the backend. So it's always recommended to upfront declare what type of variable it is. Is it an integer? Is it a string? Is it a variant? Is it a document collection? Is it a session? Or whatever. So upfront declaration of variables will help in reducing or minimizing the amount of memory consumed. We also need to keep an eye of how much data is our code dealing with. We all have come across 32K errors, 64K errors, and the reason quite often for such errors is that we would have tested with 10 documents, 15 documents, and it worked perfectly fine. But when we put this into a production server which has 200,000 documents, it just snapped. It just failed. It gave that 64K error. So it's always better to understand how much of data is our code going to deal with. Also, keeping users informed about expected delays. If you're going to process 100,000 documents with an agent, it can take 15 seconds, it can take 30 seconds. So letting the users know how much to wait is always a good thing, because that increases that improves the perspective of the user, or that gives them a better perspective of what is happening and why it is taking this much time. Also, when you change versions, when you change designer versions, it is mandatory that you recompile all the script, because that is when Lotus script gets recompiled with the inherent version of the designer. So if I'm opening a database that was built on version 7, from an 8.5 designer, if I do not do the recompile Lotus script, then I'm bound to get surprises. I'm bound to get non-working code or code that is pathetic in terms of performance. We also need to look out for agent manager, the way that we schedule it, how many concurrent agents can run at a particular number of time, how are we phasing out and how are we giving time between two agents. Are we scheduling agents in every 5 minutes and the previous agent is already not complete? This will lead to agent manager getting piled up with a big queue of agents that need to continue, which is actually server getting lined up with tasks and server performance getting affected. We need to look out at HTTP timeouts or idle timeouts before which your browser gets locked again or you need to re-enter your passwords. We also need to watch out at web query agents which can go look up some backend data and come back, which is very, very, very tedious and costly in terms of performance. Next, database properties that we might need to look at. Do not maintain unread marks because that is costly, and all of this pertain to the last tab of the database properties. Quite often most of us do not even visit this tab thinking it to be very irrelevant, but unfortunately this is where most of the database performance options and properties are hiding. So we shouldn't maintain unread marks to have better performance. Optimizing the document table map will help us achieve better performance. Overwriting free space is not a recommended thing. Specialized response hierarchy, most of the times we enable it but never use it. It is only in the case of using @children or @parent in @functions that this is used. So if we are not using that in our formula, it is better not to use it. Allowing soft deletions is one thing that gets piled up in terms of consuming database memory, and limiting the number of entries in the $updated by and the $revision fields will help us achieve better performance. Eighth of them is data. We need to understand that more number of views is going to kill performance. We need to go towards some graphical representation of data that would minimize the number of views. We need to judiciously plan out how we are going to provide search facilities. We can go for preview of data just like our notes mail gives, so that users don't need to open every document every single time. Probably you can give a preview pane on the frame set. We can go for selective replication if irrelevant data is getting replicated across different countries and locations. We can have attachments stored in a different database and pointed to in the form while the metadata retains in the same form. It's not necessary that the attachment and the metadata or the other fields are there on the same document. We can always store attachment in a common storage place and give the URL or the reference in the database, which can consume, which can conserve a lot of memory. FT index is one such thing that we have to take a call based on how frequent is the search, how are we going to really give the users what they want at the same time, not compromising much on performance. And at last but not the least, in terms of data, if there is irrelevant data or data that is dated, which might not be used frequently, but we definitely might need to take a look at it, then it is better to go for data archival mechanisms. Then the last thing is external connections, redirections and gateways. How much backend databases are we using? Other third-party softwares that might get connected, accessing common storage, LAN, WAN, SANs, read-write operations on files, reading large data from probably a backend Oracle database or an SAP database or any RDBMS, web services that might be linked to our from our agents, which might be slower, connections to our printers, fax, or telephone connections, and stuff that are external connectivities that might not be a the internal code might not be a problem itself, but one of these connections might be slower, which results in the overall performance issues in the applications. These are the 9 things that I wanted to speak about. These are the references broadly that I referred. This one at the last third level, 50 tips from Martin Scott. Wow, if we haven't gone through this PDF, it's time that you Google this right today and go through this 50 tips of Martin Scott. This is a PDF that's beautifully designed with excellent screenshots and case studies which tells impact of each significant step that is recommended to have greater performance. So thank you all for attending this webinar patiently. I hope I had contributed something that could be of use for all of you to enhance and watch out for things that might be contributing to poor performance of your Lotus Notes applications.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Omar. We are just right at the hour mark, but if you do have some questions, you can submit them, and Omar will be happy to address them. If there are any questions that maybe we don't have the answers to, we can provide an email response back to you. So I think, let me just check and see if we've got any questions coming in. I think everyone is about ready for lunch in certain time zones, so maybe we don't have any questions today. One of the most common questions is, will the slides be shared? Yes, you will receive an email directly from Argus Systems where you can watch the video replay and share it with others in your organization, and then I think they will also share the slides with you, so you have a list of all those references, and so all that information will be made available to you. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any questions. Looks like you've covered a lot of things for them to think about, though. And Omar, thank you very much for your time and preparation of this webinar. It's very informative. I really like the examples of showing, the examples of the view categories, how they can really affect the performances. And so again, thank you. Last word to you, Omar, if there's anything you'd like to add at the end, or if
Thanks a lot, everyone, for taking your time out. I know it's morning time for you, so it's really great that you all stayed back and took your time to invest in this. It's very likely that if you follow some of the recommendations that we have suggested in this, it's going to go a long way in improving actually the perception of end users in terms of Lotus Notes applications being slow, and also it will be very handy for you to look out for things that we are not aware of but are very easier to implement and achieve greater results within a short span of time. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Scott, for holding this. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for attending today. And again, watch for an email directly from Argus Systems with the link to the slides and to the video replay. Have a great day, everyone.